Thank you, Acting Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Public Health and Wellbeing Amendment Bill 2020, a bill that effectively takes away from the Public Health and Wellbeing Act the ability for noise complaints to be made against wind farms and moved into under the Environment Protection Act. We oppose this change in the bill. Basically, it will take the ability for any person to make a complaint under the Health and Wellbeing Act that the wind farm noise is affecting their health. There's not the provision in the EPA Act, in the Environmental Protection Act, to actually deal with health. It's only about noise. So it effectively shuts down the person's ability to talk or complain anywhere when there's noise complaints. Now, it doesn't take out around wind farms. It doesn't take out the ability from the Health and Wellbeing Act to complain about other noise, such as nightclubs or noise from an industrial site such as a quarry that's making a lot of noise. The councils will still have to deal with that. So it makes little sense to me that this has been taken out when what we really need is the investment made into the EPA that can give those resources when needed to the councils to be able to assess the wind farms in their electorates so that locals can talk to locals and have their rights to be listened to and heard, respected by the government. This effectively takes that right away and stifles their ability. Now, I'll just take you back a bit. My electorate of South West Coast has many, many wind farms. In fact, planned or built, and this has been going on for well over a decade. So I lived in the area where a lot of those wind farms were being proposed. In fact, had a wind farm proposed on the boundary of my farm, and I would have looked out the window and looked at it. Now, I never put in a complaint. I'm not against wind farms. This is not a comment here or about being against renewable energy. This is about the rights of the community members in South West Coast to have, when they have a problem with noise complaint around wind turbine noise, heard respectfully, and this effectively takes away that right. Now, I know that the other side will say, oh, that means that the Liberals don't care about renewable energies or don't want wind, and I just find that really quite offensive to the community members who have made the effort to come to me over many, many months about the challenges they face. Now, you know, when I look at the challenge that, you know, we've got 16 wind farms proposed in the Moyne Shire area alone. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Moyne Shire pay $80,000 to an acoustician to actually, every time there's a complaint made about the noise, to assess that. But what I am saying is the EPA should be able to assist them to do that, and it shouldn't be at a cost to the ratepayer or to the Shire and Council. It's effectively the same thing if they're going to be putting this into the EPA anyway. That cost will be there, so it can be facilitated in a manner that we can still have locals able to talk to locals who represent them, their local councillor and the locals in the role of management in council. You know, effectively, some years ago, when a lot of these wind farms were, when they were proposed, there was, you know, one or two. Now we've got so many wind farms that there are literally going to be hundreds of turbines. And initially, when the plans were actually proposed, they were a lot shorter than what they were, and there wasn't the accumulative effect that we're now going to be seeing as a result of so many. And there was very little respect for the planning, because when you look at the transmission lines, particularly if you drive from Warrnambool through to Mortlake, you will see this cobweb of transition lines. Now, we've all seen that was inappropriate, but it's there now. And this is the same with the wind towers. The people are concerned because they're worried that they're not going to have the ability to express that they can't sleep, that they're struggling with the noise, because if it goes into a bureaucracy like the EPA, they won't feel like they have the ability to be listened to. And you know, I think they've come to me with some fairly reasonable comments around that. They've said, you know, we've had dealings in the past with departments, and they don't treat us like a customer, they treat us like an inconvenience. Now, that's coming from the ministers, you know, down. It's not the people in my local communities who work in these departments. It is the culture that exists from the government who are doing exactly this and saying we're taking away their ability to actually be able to complain. At the bill briefing, we asked the Minister's advisors what the process would be if the EPA received a complaint. We actually were not able to be given the information around that. We had no information around what would be the case if they didn't agree with the outcome decision made by the EPA. Would there be an appeals process? What would the timeline be? Now, when I think about some of the people in my electorate, John Boss comes to mind. John's been trying to get information from the Minister, and I've been helping him from DWELP actually for 14 months. He has been waiting for a response for 14 months just to ask questions about the Hawkesdale wind farm, which he lives in the heart of Hawkesdale, and he's trying to understand some of the issues that will occur. So if that's the sort of process that exists in bureaucracy, you can understand why people like John and Paul and Jenny Lewis, who I converse with a lot, Neil Blaine, Annie Gardner. Annie from, I don't know, she just was so, had so many challenges. And there's people who have actually moved away. Jan Hetherington, who couldn't live on the farm anymore. Ron and Chris Gelbart, who couldn't live on the farm anymore. They had to buy somewhere else to be able to get rest. I think it was, Ron used to tell me, you know, four nights a month or 4 nights a week. I can't really remember. Now, Ron I've known since I was probably 5, I reckon, and a great football player, great contributor to the community. You know, in the fire brigade, all those things that these people in the Hawkesdale community who are concerned, you know, they've all contributed. They're not anti-renewable, they're not anti-community, they're not anti-progress. They just want to have their right to be listened to and heard, respected. And by taking it out of the Health and Wellbeing Act, no longer being able to say it affects our health, only being able to go through to the EPA where they'll only have the noise tested to a certain level, and then they won't actually be able to say, well, you know, it's actually affecting my health. It might comply, but it might actually be affecting the health of the person, whether it be the mental health or the physiological health. So, and you know, the government, if I was a sceptic, I'd be saying they're not interested in really getting the balance right between people's ability, like the Howleys, who are concerned about their right to stay on the farm when they're absolutely inundated by wind farms all around them. I think the government's so hell-bent on getting their renewable targets met that at the expense of communities, they're just saying bad luck. When there's so many more landscapes where there is less dense populations, as the member for Lowan just discussed, where if they put up a proper electricity line and had the ability to feed in, we would actually be able to get this balance right. So we're not against renewable energy, we're not against wind farms, but we are against totally inundating people and then gagging their ability to speak. So I think about if I was in Melbourne and if I lived in Werribee and there was a big 42-storey building going up like the Sofitel, I reckon there'd be a few people complaining about that. And under the Health and Wellbeing Act, they'd be able to do that. However, if they have a wind farm put up in South West Coast in their backyard that, you know, maybe 10 years ago when the permit was approved was going to be, you know, 120 metres high, now going to be about 180 or 220 from to the tip to the ground with, you know, a really big imposition. That's quite an imposing structure in their looking at their horizon, and they're concerned. So why haven't they got the same right to actually complain or put in a suggestion that they'd like to be considered? Why do people who have less density in their regions have less rights? That's the question. This is very much, once we get into the EPA, it will be very much like a David and Goliath situation. And the people in my area that I've mentioned, you know, Jan and John Murphy, who have been trying to just get some consultation around this. These are people who are feeling like the government is just ignoring them and not listening. So I look at, we're not anti-wind farm. I'll continue to say it. We have wind farms being built in our electorate. So if we were if the government was serious and it wasn't just a rush to get ride roughshod over people and get all these targets met, then they'd make sure that the Keppel Prince wind farm would actually have the ability to be making them. They talk about local content, yet we've got ships coming in from overseas with wind turbines on the back of them going straight past Keppel Prince, unloaded and off to wind farms, and civil engineering companies from Portland and the region totally ignored, and companies coming down from Queensland to do the site preparation. I mean, there's something really wrong with this when, I know it looks good to have lots of renewable energy, but it also is important to respect the people